The year is 1954. Dr. Verwoerd, Minister of Native Affairs. When I have control of native education, I will reform it so that the natives will be taught from childhood to realize that equality with Europeans is not for them. People who believe in equality are not desirable teachers for natives. When my department controls native education, it will know for what class of higher education a native is fitted, and whether he will have a chance in life to use his knowledge. What is the use of teaching the Bantu child mathematics when it cannot use it in practice? This is quite absurd.
All the other information about the outside world was extracted like a tooth out of our education system. What was left was a skewed sense of an education which prepared us to be good servants and nothing else. You say, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an architect. And your parents would say, those are dreams for white children.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness, accepting that there are differences between people. That while these differences exist, and you have to acknowledge them, at the same time, you can live together, aid one another, but that it can best be done when you act as good neighbors always do.
If we give freedom to our colonial peoples inside our own country, and they are a majority, we would immediately be swamped. And that is our basic dilemma.
Now and again, having little fun. She doesn't care if the fun and games she play is dangerous to everyone.
South Africa may be a white dominion, but it's a black country. There are just on 10 million Africans, over 1.25 million people of partly African descent, nearly 500,000 Asiatics, mainly Indian. These three groups of non-Europeans outnumber the whites by 4 to 1. In some areas, in and near the towns, you hardly see a white person at all. The whites are very conscious of their numerical inferiority. The Europeans made South Africa. They feel they ought to have the best place in it. They don't seem worried about the future in South Africa. But how it goes depends on what they think. Maybe they'll be content to accept the government's idea that they're inferior to the white man, and they'll be happy to grow up as second-class citizens in their own country. Or perhaps things will go the other way. In a few years' time, there could be a great African revolt, and those children might be taking part in it.
The Archbishop is a peaceful man. Together say that the freedom fighters will overcome the very strong. I wanna know if you're blind, Joanna.
Much of the history of this country has been written by other people, by whites, either with a nationalist flavor or with a liberal flavor. What sort of people have to depend for their own history on outsiders, on other people?
West wind, blow it gentle over the souls of Africa. My sons, proud and noble, here within my heart they lay. Dark cloud hanging over, nest thy bosom, strong and free. Make us free from exploitation and strife, because nothing is more precious in life. West wind, with your splendor, take my people by the hand. Spread your glory, sunshine, unify Mother Africa now. Unify my precious land. Unify us, don't divide us. Unify us, don't divide us. We don't need that now, Lord. Let us not fight over trivials. Let us learn how to love ourselves first, because the unification is the thing now. I said the unification is the thing now. Even in Europe, they are talking about unity and European security now. Well, let us talk about our own. Unify, Mother Africa, yes. Unify my precious land.
We need first to awaken our intellectuals at the universities, to awaken them to the need for research so that they write their own history.
All of us, irrespective of the political party to which we belong, with all our debates, our quarrels, we have been able to bring about liberation. And we have all contributed in various ways.
The year 1963, the people's president was taken away.
When I got married in 1998, Mandela was our guest of honor in our wedding. So Tata Sisulu couldn't make it. So the following day, we spent the whole day with Tata Sisulu. The point you are making, Sisulu told me that he saw the future leader in Mandela when they met in the mid-40s. So every day he nurtured him because he was a man, a young man, according to what Sisulu was saying, who had this traditional background, but also a trained lawyer, a person who was loved by people, that they need to nurture this person because he has a potential to be a future leader. What a good investment.
As a person like Comrade Walter, he is the person who brought us all up in the struggle.
Nelson Mandela's life is so intimately interwoven with the history of the struggle of South Africa.
And I come here to praise Mandela and to bring this message to his jailer. Your walls may hold the man inside, but your walls will never hold back the tide. 'Cause in the years they shut him away, a generation has grown where he stood. We're gonna see the day when the walls have begun to crumble, when the laws have begun to burn, when the wind is singing freedom, when the stone begins to turn, when the wind is singing freedom, when the stone begins to turn. And we come here to sing for freedom and to send our voices to the ones who need them. Freedom for South Africa and justice for all those who hunger. 'Cause in the years they shut him away, a generation has grown where he stood. We're gonna see the day when the walls have begun to crumble, when the laws have begun to burn, when the wind is singing freedom, when the stone begins to turn, when the wind is singing freedom, when the wind is singing freedom, when the wind is singing freedom, when the stone begins to burn.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Well, it is music and dancing that makes me at peace with the world. And at peace with myself. But I don't see much movement at the back there, you know? I would like us to join. Let's just repeat. Let's just repeat it. Okay. Let's just repeat it. Let's all join.
We are calling this Mandela's Africa. That Mandela becomes kind of the metaphor for every struggle, or the struggles, right? In which all of you played such a strong and brave role. How does that feel for you? Because you're always having to talk about the relationship you had with the person, or the interaction, or you know, the struggles together, but that becomes the name.
Yeah, but that doesn't concern me one bit. Okay. After all, his was the main role in the thing. Okay. Many of us just come by the way. What disturbed me, for instance, Governor Mbeki, now Professor Colin Bundy, has written a little thing about him. So I said to him, here's a man who you should write much more about him. It needs a book. But he's published a small little thing. Okay. Sisulu, of course, there is a big book about him. Yes. See? And then the escapes. It was Godrai, Walpi, Mozi Mullah, Abdullah Jessup. What about the escape of Mombaris and the others? Tim Jenkins, Mombaris and them. Okay. It was just as dramatic. Yeah. They made a key in jail. Yeah. Then there were the other escapes like Wali Musa and them. Yeah. They escaped and took refuge in the German embassy. Yes. So my point is, why highlight this escape of the four and not talk about the other escapes?
The victory that we've got is a collective one.
Mandela himself would not be happy that there was so much focus just on him, while neglecting all the other people.
For the purposes of our documentary, how would you describe Madiba?
How would I? Well, he was a complex person. He's not like your next door neighbor. He had a mixture of the peasant and the aristocrat. But he could relate to everybody as equals. As Clinton has said, you know, in his presence, he makes one feel big. Yeah, he's a complex character. I have written when he turned 80, I think the August group published a supplement in which mine was the main article. It was published the day before he turned 80. It was a Friday, in which I mentioned, among other things, his strength and not forgetting his vanity. But there we played a trick on him. I mentioned in that article what I call the Pantene Revolution. It appeared on the Friday. The Pantene Revolution was referring to a brand of hair oil that he got used to. And when it was not manufactured anymore, he refused to believe it. So when we were at Portsmouth prison, you know, after 18 years we were transferred to, 5 of us, to Portsmouth prison. The authorities sent this water to every shop, look for Pantene. So he brought a few bottles, but Madiba wouldn't believe that it's no more manufactured. Now comes his 80th birthday, and there's this supplement where I've written about. But what we have planned, a friend of mine in America, Sharon Gelman, she managed to send me 2 bottles of Pantene. Where she got it, I don't know. So we organized the media to come to his place, unknown to him, about this Pantene. This water, Brunt, we flew him from Cape Town, gave him the 2 bottles of Pantene. We had the whole media there, outside. And I went in, said, look, Walter is outside, and come and greet him. So he says, sure. He comes out, and he sees the whole media, television, the lot, and this water, Brunt, with a banner, happy birthday, and 2 bottles of Pantene. But what happened is that the day before, when my article appeared, I told Zinzi, please read this bit to him, and phone me and say how he reacted, this Pantene revolution. Because if he was angry, we would not carry out what we planned. So she phoned me back, and she said he had a good laugh. On that basis, we organized this other thing with the media. And that's him, you see. He has the ability to laugh at himself.
A young lady of 13 told me in my face that when I was young, I was handsome. And she said, but you are now old and ugly. But a more devastating experience I had the other day from a young lady of 5 or 6. I don't know whether after that I should continue having conversation with young ladies. She asked me the question, when were you born? I said, I can't remember. But it was long, long ago. She said, but when? I say, no, I can't remember. But it was long, long ago. Then she suddenly switched and said, why did you go to jail? I say, no, I didn't go there on my own. They sent me there. He says, who sent you there? Some people who did not like me. How long did you stay there? I say, I can't remember. But it was a very long time. She said, a year? I said, no, it was more than that. 2 years? I said, it was more than that. She said, but how long? I said, I told you, I can't remember. But it was a long time. She said, you are a stupid old man. And after that, she continued conversing merrily, as if she had paid me a compliment.
He had his commanding presence in any gathering, if you're there in a small gathering or a big gathering, he had that presence. If he walks in, people start focusing on him. That personality was there. If you read this book of quotations,
Yes.
2000 quotations, he said this several times that what worries him most is people regard him as a saint. And he says he wishes people regard him as an ordinary human being with shortcomings. He accepts that. And he says he wishes people would do that, not regard him as a saint. He's not comfortable with that. And you'll see in that quotation book, he says that over and over again.
In December 1993, I was walking along a street in the Bahamas, and I met a couple, and the husband walked up to me and said, "Are you Mr. Mandela?" I said, "Well, many people mistake me for that chap." And he said, "Well, would I be entitled to mistake you for that chap as well?" I say, "You'll be doing what others do." He then turned to his wife and said, "Mom, this is Mr. Mandela." She had a very severe expression. And she said, "What is he famous for?" And the husband dropped his voice and he said, "Mr. Mandela, Mr. Mandela." I asked her, "What is he famous for?" Without waiting for an answer from the husband, she turned to me. "What are you famous for?" I won't go into the other details.
Madiba was born into circumstances that could very easily have confined him to the village, Mtata, Mvezo, and he may very well have ended up being the local chief. And yet he had to leave together with his cousin for the mines. And at the mines, he found a job. One was employed as a security, the other as a clerk. And of course, the chief back home sent word that they had eloped and they should be sent right back home. He elected not to go back home, and in his own words, he got to know Walter Sisulu, who was already a successful black business person who was running his own real estate business. And he says he was so impressed by the fact that here was a black person running an office with a clerk busy hammering away at the keyboards. And then, of course, when he was ushered in to meet Walter Sisulu, he was so impressed by Walter Sisulu's mastery of the English language that he decided there and then that whatever organization that Walter Sisulu belongs to, he would be very glad to join that organization. So that's how he ends up with the African National Congress, and of course they were the founding generation of the ANC Youth League.
The story of Mandela can never be separated from the story of Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo, because of all the leaders of the ANC of that generation, these three friends and comrades, I believe they're the ones who shaped the modern ANC.
Nelson Mandela was part of a body of people that believed in fundamental human rights, decency, human dignity, and that's what they were guided by. They weren't guided by, like, you know, a 10 Commandments or something, you know. They were, you know, guided by common sense, and that's what it was. And what was the right thing to do? I mean, you can't say the Freedom Charter, you know. Yes, it's true, but the Freedom Charter, remember, it was a 1950s document. It didn't say anything about protection of the environment. It didn't say anything about gender equality in the manner in which the Constitution did, and, you know, it didn't even think about sexual orientation, or, you know, any of those sorts of things. Huh? Nelson Mandela was a modern man of his times. He wasn't stuck in some sort of dogma or anything of that sort, but nor was, you know, the other people in the leadership. I didn't know him before he went to prison, because I was like 5 years old, or whatever it was. And so I'm not in a position to judge. All I can say is that when I met him, you know, he had a progressive worldview about all aspects of things, you know. He was like the rest of us who were involved in the struggle, and like progressive people that you would find anywhere in the world. No. You know, we always spoke about what is the vision of the liberation movement and the people of South Africa, and what kind of South African nation do we want. Never did Nelson Mandela ever come to a meeting and say, listen, you people, this is my vision, and you will all adhere to it. He never had anything of that sort. He never had a Nelson Mandela policy or a Nelson Mandela vision. You know, in many ways, he was just a normal guy, you know. He was a great leader, a tough CEO, you know, a taskmaster, could make things happen, a man of principle, really a man of principle. He just, the one thing he wouldn't have done was allowed a settlement agreement that resulted in something that wasn't a true democracy in this country. He wouldn't have allowed that. He wouldn't have allowed a constitution that didn't entrench fundamental human rights. You know, he genuinely believed in that. And if he had to go back to jail, he would have done that. You know, so he genuinely believed in that. You know, the name of Nelson Mandela and the person of Nelson, the idea of Nelson Mandela helped to create a global campaign and awareness about the freedom struggle and about people, political prisoners, and about apartheid, because the world likes to attach complex things to a person and a name, and Nelson Mandela was that name.
Nelson Mandela. Character, freedom fighter, volunteer-in-chief of the Defiance Campaign, commander-in-chief of MK, comrade, leader, prisoner, negotiator, statesman, Tata Madiba was indeed a global icon.
Madiba was tough-minded, tender-hearted, piercing intellect, unbending determination, fearless and courageous. He found another zone of spiritual strength. Punishment lost its power. That's a new level of power. Lies can't limit it. Jails can't contain it. Bullets can't kill it. Crosses become crowns. Crucifixion leads to resurrection. Death is a comma, not a period. Jesus, Gandhi, Dr. King, Madiba is in that rarefied zone of moral authority.
South Africans, and indeed the rest of humanity, has a lot to learn from Dada's life. A life of selfless and utmost dedication to the freedom, democracy, equality, respect, dignity for all.
A leader, internal will to fight back, Leaders mold opinion. Don't just follow opinion polls. Leaders sacrifice personal gratification for the higher, greater good. Leaders choose the laws of sacrifice, which leads to greatness, over the laws of convenience, which leads to collapse. We learn in the struggle. Literacy is the key to liberation. Strong minds break strong chains. He was an enlightened, literate man.
It is in Tata Madiba that the humanist value of Ubuntu, which teach us that I am because you are, continue to find expression. It was Tata Madiba who led us in the important program of reconciliation and reaching out to one another.
Forgiveness, a key to reconciliation, requires repentance and contrition. White in jail, while in jail, he said, keep sanctions, end racist apartheid, free all political prisoners, end state of emergency, end passbooks, afford the right to vote, constitutional guarantees, legitimately elected democratic government on a non-racial basis. He helped change the world opinion against apartheid and made South African apartheid a pariah nation, inspired sanctions against state-sponsored terrorism.
It is from him that his generation, that we were reminded once more that what unites us far outweighs that which divides us. That humanity is one, and that our destiny is linked.
To speak of his being such a forgiving man, winners are empowered to forgive or redeem. To forgive, you must first deal with the issue of repentance and contrition. The system repented. One about to be governed had the choice to forgive or to reject. He was shaped by the fire, the oven of apartheid externally, and his internal will to resist and willingness to fight back became that combination. He used his mind and his body and spirit to transform the order, legal demonstrations, and the military. He fought to change the law.
It was Tata Madiba who instilled in us the values of humility, hard work, respect for one another, honesty, integrity, as well as equality and dignity for all. These are values that continue to guide us as we build the new South African nation, united in its diversity. As South Africans, we are proud to be the children of Madiba and to share his proud legacy with the rest of the world.
African Americans feel central connection to the struggle here in South Africa. It's really one system and three continents. It's South Africa, it's Britain, Europe, it's North America. A century of parallel joint struggle. NAACP 1911, ANC 1912. Students from South Africa studying at Yale went south to watch the founding of NAACP and meet with its leaders. They met with Booker Washington. Fort Hare is in some sense a response to Tuskegee in Alabama. A system of economic exploitation, racist supremacists. Racism is unscientific, it is emotionally disturbing, politically divisive, superior illusions and inferior delusions. For us in the States, we were declared to be 3/5 of a human being, white 7/5. Racism, moral, indefensible, ungodly. It is a house built on sand.
Up to this day, Tata continues to inspire all of us and remains a symbol of hope and resilience to all those striving for a better and more humane world. We will continue to honor Tata Madiba and his generation of leaders for the massive contribution in first liberating us and then in contributing and shaping the process of building a better South Africa, a better Africa, and a better world.
Tonight for me is special because I want to do something that takes away our attention from singularly focusing on Madiba. I know from all my association that he would want to be remembered as part of that triumvirate of Madiba, Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo. This is the trio that Rusty Bernstein has said, if ever great men mold nations' history, the interconnection between these three men, these three great men, shaped ours through the decades of struggle which led to the new South Africa. Never see Madiba outside of the struggle. Never see him outside of his two giant colleagues, Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo.
You'll recall that even though Sisulu was not as educated as Mandela and Tambo and Lembete, Anton Lembete, but he's the one who brought all these young men, because he was a little bit older than them, he brought them together. They formed the Youth League. They see the ANC being an organization of ladies and gentlemen that goes to London from time to time, petitioning the Queen, deputations. One day we want to be in Parliament. So they say no, no, no. They see the liberation of India, Indonesia, all around the world, the decolonization. They say there must be militancy within the ANC. They formed the Youth League. They forced the Mother Board in 1949 to adopt a militant program of action. So that's why I'm saying that we need to have that context. So from that time on, things were never the same in the ANC. In the 50s, 52, Mandela became the volunteer-in-chief so that the Mother Board is forced into militant action to defy apartheid laws.
1949, we see the same youth leaguers preparing to go to a conference with the aim of taking over the leadership of the ANC because they felt that the old generation were rather too understanding of the difficulties, and they were ready to radicalize the approach to the challenges facing African people. And of course that brought them into conflict with the president of the ANC, Dr. Xuma, whom they visited just prior to the ANC's 35th National Conference of 1949. Madiba tells the story of how, accompanied by Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo, they visited Dr. Xuma and late at night and presented a draft program of action to Dr. Xuma and said to him, look, you want our support, here is our program of action. If you endorse it, you have our support. And Dr. Xuma showed them the door. On the way, that's when they decided that no, Dr. Xuma is not a good candidate because he doesn't support this program of action. And so they decided that no, they would search for another candidate. And they remembered that during the NRC, there was a fiery member of the NRC, Dr. Moroka, who in 1946, following the mine worker strike and its suppression, Dr. Moroka was the mover of a motion for the adjournment of the NRC, and that was the end of the NRC. And so they thought this is a very fiery leader. And of course, Dr. Moroka, you know, those days, the African National Congress was regarded as the parliament of the African people. Because in 1910, when the Union of South Africa was established, Africans were excluded from the main body politic, including parliament. And so they founded the Native Congress as their own parliament. And so many of the enlightened Africans regarded the African National Congress as their home, natural political home. So Dr. Moroka was actually not a card-carrying member at that time. But the Youth League was so desperate to nominate him, they organized the membership card for him and they nominated him. So these problems of the Youth League and leadership elections are not new. They go back to the 40s. So they then approached Dr. Moroka, who of course agreed, and they nominated him, and of course he was elected. Walter Sisulu was elected as the Secretary General of the ANC at that conference. Oliver Tambo is a member of the National Executive Committee, and Nelson Mandela. Now, these are youth leaguers who end up in the National Executive Committee of the ANC. And Dr. Moroka having been elected, so the program of action was adopted.
The ANC is a parliament of South African people. That's how it was formed. So that history is very important. That when the ANC was founded, it was founded by the people of South Africa. The chiefs, kings, your intellectuals, ordinary people. So that Congress mentality, the real Congress, that's what it is, the ANC. Even though we're a multi-class organization, anybody can come into the ANC like in the ocean. Anything can go there. But our bias has always been with the poor, with the working people. That's the bias of the ANC. So whatever happened, our grassroots support is there because we work for the poor men in Soweto, in Gugulethu, in Tanzania, in Tsolo. That's what we are for, to change the lives of people.
The first campaign arising out of that program of action was the Defiance of Unjust Laws campaign. They identified 6 laws which they regarded as unjustified. And they were to defy these laws. Some of those laws were really the separation of people, even in public buildings. Africans were only allowed to enter the building through some side door. In shops, they weren't allowed to stand on the same, in front of the counter. There was a bar, an iron bar, which separated where the blacks would stand. And of course, it meant that once a white customer walks in, you would be abandoned and the white customer would have to be served ahead of you. So they decided that they adopted this program of action and they organized the Defiance campaign. But because the Defiance campaign was to be conducted as a political campaign, Nelson Mandela became the volunteer-in-chief. And literally all the recruits, those who were to participate in the campaign, had to be drilled, had to be inducted and made to appreciate that this is a political campaign. So when they defy and the law enforcement officers are apprehending them, they should ensure that they are arrested for one offense, and that is defying an act which is unjust. Because you see, when the police arrest you, never mind what the rule book says. In the rule book, they would say, no, when they testify in court later, they would say, no, we introduced ourselves, that we are police officers, and that explained to the accused, what rights he or she enjoys, and that he has a right not to answer questions that may implicate himself or herself. They don't do that when they arrest you in the real world. You are lucky if your feet touches the ground. And so the volunteers had to appreciate that even when they are accosted like that, they should not resist, because in the course of resisting, the charge may change to something else. And the charge had to be defiance of unjust laws. And 8,000 of them were arrested for defying these unjust laws. And Nelson Mandela was a volunteer-in-chief. The subsequent charges, of course, Dr. Moroka, the President General of the ANC, was also arrested. And it is during that period, in 1952 now, that Dr. Moroka, being a doctor and, not used to these kinds of campaigns, discovered that, associating with these kinds of people is not helpful because you get arrested. So he distanced himself from them. Now remember, he's the leader. But took a decision that no, he will have no track with these people. And organized his own defense team, separate from his own followers as a leader. That, of course, meant the end of his tenure as President General of the ANC, because in the conference that very year, conference elected Chief Albert Luthuli to be the President General.
I understand that they talked about armed struggle even in the 50s, but the time was not yet ripe. But I believe, my perception, that it is Mandela who was at the forefront of bringing about this paradigm shift in the ANC, because he realized that these talks, even these demonstrations, going to jail, defying apartheid, petty apartheid, and so on, was not going to achieve because of the intransigence of the apartheid regime. So, sort of, he was the founder of Umkhonto weSizwe in 1961. So for him going to Africa in 1962, I think he was on a mission, because now he was the commander-in-chief of Umkhonto weSizwe, the military wing. He needed the military and political support of the African states, especially those who had just become independent, like Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia has always been independent, and many of those African states, Zambia, even Tanzania, who had just become independent in 1960. So I think he had always had a strategy, Mandela. I think even the way he grew up, the way he studied, you can see that this is the man, whenever he falls down, he does just lie down. He thinks about the next hurdle to overcome. So he has always been persistent, just to move forward. Even the move from the armed struggle towards a peaceful negotiated settlement is a reflection that Mandela had always had that long-term view of the freedom of the people of South Africa. So I was able to differentiate between the strategy and the tactic. The strategy has always been to defeat the apartheid system and on its ashes building a non-racial, democratic, non-sexist and prosperous South Africa. So in the 80s he realized that the time had come because military struggle was not the strategy of the ANC. It was a means towards the end. Because at some point, many people in the ANC even believed wrongly that because the ANC had taken the armed struggle, that then this is the principal policy of the ANC, which was not the case. Back to Mandela. So his speeches on the dock were very widely distributed, the Freedom Charter. So the Freedom Charter, contrary to popular perception, was never banned in South Africa. So we had access to the Freedom Charter. So we read it word by word, comma, full stop, the Freedom Charter. So the speech is the first speech by Mandela in 1962. I feel like a black man in a white man's court. I'm prepared to die, Rivonia trial. So those speeches really inspired us. So even at the time that I did criminal law at university and criminal procedure, in terms of law books, we had access to those speeches. So they really inspired that. Mandela was like our icon. During our time in the 80s and early 90s, Chris Hani was like our hero as young men and women. So Mandela reminded us of Chris Hani of the 50s and the 60s. His militancy, that he was prepared to die, really inspired us that he is a prominent man who could have chosen to live a life of luxury as a very successful lawyer in Johannesburg with his comrade and colleague, President Oliver Tambo. He was prepared to leave everything in order to die for the freedom. So that really inspired us.
If we carefully think about how Mandela was chosen as a leader, his image and his story kind of resonated with us, and it became almost part of your living awareness of what was wrong in the country and what you stood for. I think it's obviously a lot of his personal charisma that I came to experience much later during his presidency that made him the natural choice. I mean, we often do wonder what would have happened if Walter Sisulu was chosen as our leader. Having said that, equally revered was Oliver Tambo, and I had the privilege of meeting him one day, and I can only explain the kind of charisma that these two guys had as the minute they walk into a room, you feel their presence. And OR was small, it was very short compared to Madiba's tall stature. But you feel the same electricity. I remember I was a postgraduate student when I met him at the anti-apartheid rally in Hyde Park to free Mandela, and I was trembling, and it didn't matter how often I saw Mandela, you would end up trembling because there's the electricity, and his charisma was quite enormous. Having said that, there was also the human being behind that enormous charisma. And then, of course, there was the head of state that we had to deal with.
I met him in 1946. You've heard of Ismail Mir, J.N. Singh. They were law students at Wits, and Madiba was a law student. So I was very friendly, although I was in high school, but I had become friendly with Ismail Mir in particular. He became my mentor, he and J.N. Singh. Now Ismail occupied this flat which I subsequently occupied number 13 Colwood House. So after law lectures, I happened to be in that flat one day visiting Ismail, and of course Madiba came from law lectures with them, and that was my first meeting with him, 1946.
Was it anything special?
In the sense that, that time, university students who were not white, there were very few. Africans were even fewer. So as a high school student, when you meet a university student, you are in awe of this person. And that's how I reacted to Madiba. And I could go back to school, to my schoolmates, and boast, I have met a university student. And this is how he related to me. So that was 46.
Okay. And then the friendship lasts for many decades. So in 1946, after that first interaction, did you meet again in terms of work, political work?
Well, we were, they were in the youth league. So there was some joint activity, but the youth league policy was exclusivist, not racist, but it did not believe in cooperation with the other liberation organizations, and it was very anti-communist. Their policy was the ANC must go at it alone. That's the youth league, right? As far as the senior congresses are concerned, the ANC National, the Natal Indian Congress, Transvaal Indian Congress, already in 1947, they signed a Pact of Unity, but not the Youth League. The Youth League, in 1950, there was a strike on the eve of the banning of the Communist Party and other restrictions. So there was a campaign for a strike against this imminent Suppression of Communism Act. The Youth League opposed it. Physically, tried to break up pro-strike meetings. But it's in that situation, while we were organizing the strike, that I had my first and only clash with Madiba. By that time we knew each other, not too well, but we knew each other. And we just met each other by accident on Commissioner Street. We were organizing the strike, they were opposing it. And then the discussion became a bit heated, and I, with all my wisdom of 20 years, or a little more, 21 years, challenged him to choose a platform wherever he went. I'll debate with him and I'll win. So we parted, and he was very angry. The strike was an overwhelming success, in spite of the fact that the Youth League tried to break up strike meetings and so forth. But 18 people were killed. And that led to a meeting at national level, ANC, Indian Congress, Communist Party on the eve of its banning. There was this, because of the killings, the national organizations now met to decide how to answer that. So Madiba was by that time also in the national executive of the ANC. I was a doorman and driving people to things then. He got up and complained about me, that little clash we had. And I was at the door. I'm not a delegate, I'm at the door just driving people and all that. I thought my mentors like Ismail Mir and J.N. Singh will stand up and defend me. And nothing at all. Ismail just got up and said, look, just dismiss this hot-headed youngster. That ended there.
So you never had your one-on-one?
Well, then throughout our imprisonment, I kept on teasing him that we won.
Yes, yes.
By that time, of course, everything had changed.
Right.
His whole attitude. The first meeting, joint meeting he attended, was this national executive meeting between the ANC and the Indian Congress and the Communist Party. That's the first time now he attends a joint meeting, which was contrary to the policy of the Youth League. But then the Youth League itself started changing.
In 1962, we became aware that Mandela was out of the country because the international press were reporting this, and one hung on every word. His interview from London on BBC Overseas Service, it was inspirational, and we were thrilled. We felt he was, and we understood that he was mobilizing support for our struggle and for the armed struggle. And this was all very relevant to us. And it meant with such a dynamic leader, we were going to win. We had no second thought about that. I'm called to a meeting in July 1962 by the commander of our MK region, which is the then Natal. There were 4 of us on the command. Koenig and Lovu, who was the commander, Billy Nair, the deputy, and myself, and Eric and Charlie. And a guy called Bruno Mtolo, who later actually became a traitor and gave evidence against Mandela, and then Sisulu and Mbeki Govan at the Pretoria trial of 63-64. Anyway, I was called to this meeting in a small safe house in the Durban area, and didn't know what it was, and I was just told, no, we've got an important visitor. And in strides this gigantic man, not so broad-shouldered, very charismatic, and wearing khaki fatigues, you know, a khaki shirt and slacks, looking really very handsome and grave. And the Mandela we know with his beaming smiles, that's not the Mandela I met on that day. He's the commander, our commander of our military wing. He's slipped back into the country from his trip into Africa in the first half of 1962. And we weren't aware he was back. And there he is, and he's come to speak to us, the command for the whole of Natal, about MK. And he chatted to each in turn, asking us various questions. In retrospect, he spent most of the time talking to the man who was going to become the traitor, to be the following year, Bruno Mtolo. He seemed to know quite a bit about me. He knew Billy Nair, you see, and Koenig and Lovo, who were, they must have been in their 40s, but they were seasoned leaders. You know, I was a new guy, and so was this man, Bruno. But he was very pleasant with me and encouraged me to continue with my sporting activities, which he was aware of. I was something of a runner at the university and so on. And he said, look, physical fitness is very important, and you're going to need to recruit people, and we need to recruit from all sectors of the population. Asked me a few other things about exactly what I was doing and my military knowledge, and he was also aware through the discussions that I was reading a lot, which he encouraged as well. I remember in the way he talked to the whole command, it was giving us a report about Africa and saying that Africa was behind us, and that every country he visited, a dozen or so, from Tanzania and Ethiopia to Morocco and West Africa, etc., that they were all behind us. Big things were happening in Africa. There were other movements that we were aware of through the press who were developing their armed struggle, that the Algerian struggle was a very fine, courageous and important one, that they were giving training, that the Ethiopians, a really long independent state, were prepared to help us fully. as was the case with the Egyptians, etc. And we could bank on this kind of assistance, that we were going to need to recruit people to come out for training. But most important was going to be our courage in the country, our decisiveness and determination, and our skill in carrying out the operations for that phase of the campaign, which was the sabotage campaign. He congratulated us on the small operations that we had carried out from December 16th into the early part of 1962, which were with petrol bombs, which were with homemade explosives against the communication system of the country, and particularly against the officers symbolic of the apartheid system, like the African pass officers, the Indian and coloured separate development officers and the kind, which we had attacked with bombs. So he was very, very impressed and warmly applauded that, but he said we had to take things to a higher level, and we had to find more potent explosives, which were dynamite, and in a country of mining and construction, we needed to get our hands on. I remember him, in terms of Africa and books, emphasizing the need to study other struggles and to read about them. And when we talked about different titles, including from Cuba, Che Guevara's books on guerrilla warfare or accounts, the Cyprus struggle, the struggle of the resistance and the partisans of World War II in Europe, he said to us, study the methods used by our people, our warriors in the struggle against colonial conquest. We could learn so much from that. And he said, learn from the Kenyans and read the book by Didymus Komati about the Land Freedom Army and their struggle against the British in Kenya. He was very much taken up with that, and this great hero who in the end was executed by the British because it was so much an African struggle. Africa south of the Sahara. He wasn't just into negritude or blackness, because he was very positive about the Algerian struggle that I've mentioned. So it was that kind of meeting and encouragement and talk about what next after the sabotage campaign. And I raised the question about the Transkei as a part of the country which I said seemed to be tailor-made for guerrilla struggle because of the rural base of the people, the mountainous area, and it had forests along the coast. But he wasn't drawn on that. I got the impression by his answer, which he didn't seem to want to commit himself to, that, look, this is something we'll look at later. Let's develop this sabotage campaign. The readings I had later made me feel that the leadership weren't too clear, by the way, about how to take the struggle further, and maybe felt, and it was important in retrospect, that perhaps the sabotage campaign would, one, mobilize our people and inspire them after the outlawing of the ANC and PAC, Communist Party, the way they smashed the three-day strike in May 1961, inspire our people coming out of that those setbacks, and remobilize them, lead them through actions such as the MK sabotage actions, and put pressure on the regime to come to some form of a more peaceful negotiated solution. I think that was in their minds. And of course that happened 30 years or so later. He had been to Britain and he said we had strong support there from the Labour Party. So I would think in his mind that there was this factor, that he was aware of the potential of an anti-apartheid movement, not only isolating and weakening apartheid South Africa, but building up the kind of pressure on governments in America and Britain and Europe that would force the apartheid regime to get to the point of being prepared to make a 180-degree turn and negotiate a solution.
I met him for the first time when he was in prison. You know, I met him a few times, a couple of times when he was in prison. And then I really got to know him after his release from prison, and we worked together for all of the years until 1994, when we had the first democratic elections. Then I served in his cabinet for the 5 years that he was president. And then he retired from politics. And then I continued in cabinet, and you know, I was in the leadership of the ANC at the time, and he participated in a few meetings of the National Executive Committee, and then he retired, and then we didn't work together.
The first time I actually met him was on the day he was released. I'd flown in from Harare. We had gone to Harare often to do various debriefings with the ANC. And I flew in the morning, and as part of my duties, I was a marshal to marshal the crowds, even though I'm frightfully short. Nevertheless, you know, you took the task at hand that was assigned to you from the UDF. And I was on the Grand Parade, and the gunfire was going off at the back as the right wing were trying to disrupt and create a stampede, which is why they rerouted Mandela to Rondebosch, as you recall. Well, a while back later, Jesse Jackson's motorcade, because they took Mandela into the back of the city hall, and Jesse Jackson's motorcade came through the front, trying to forge a way through those crowds that have been waiting for hours and hours in the hot sun to see Mandela. And the crowd surged, and I got crushed against a combi, and the air got compressed out of my lungs, so I collapsed, and they hoisted me up over the balcony, went into the first aid room, and then they resuscitated me there. After that, I had no more appetite for marshalling. I thought, okay, my duty is done. And I was just sitting around in the city hall. I wasn't even aware that he had finally come into the city hall from where he was going to address the crowds, when the door opened and this tall man, looking extremely grey and ashen, I nearly had a heart attack for the second time. I nearly passed out on that day because it's the first time I saw him live. And I mean, we'd read stories about him, we'd read his history, we'd sang struggle songs around him, and suddenly this man is there right in front of me. I was sitting on the ground, actually, and I looked up, and I remember that fierce determination. He was ashen and very serious, and that fierce determination as he strode down that corridor to address the crowd. So I had a bird's eye view, well, from behind the Release Mandela Committee, completely by default. But it was a life-altering experience.
I was working very comfortably for Beyers Naudé, who was a clergyman, and I was the director for a scholarship organization that we had started working with the Swedes on, where we were deliberately training future civil servants with the help of the Swedes. I think we were very forward-looking, and so I was very comfortable. I must say, it was the most comfortable job I'd ever had. I'm working with Umbe, no stress. I could do all my political work for Fetro from his office. I could do Oma Sisulu's work and her running around, and I could manage my job.
And so, you could get paid.
And I got paid, not a great deal. I mean, 800 Rand a month was the max, you know.
Okay.
And so I think it was in May of 1990, Madiba had been released, and I was called one day by Nomsa from his office, and she said, the Deputy President wants to see you. And at first you take a Deputy President now, and you think, oh, by the way, Madiba is the Deputy President of the ANC. So I came, it was actually in this building. It was then called Munich Reinsurance House. And I came to his office and waited, and he came out to fetch me and said, Jessie, please come in. Well, very polite, please sit down. And then he fidgeted on his desk for a minute or so, put everything straight, and I was just fascinated. For me, all I could do was, couldn't take my eyes off him, because I had not actually seen him physically like other people had, because on the day he was released, I was in the National Reception Committee office, preparing for the rally in Orlando, in FNB Stadium. And preparing for, he insisted that he wanted to go back to home and so on. So I'd not met him, and I'd not had that privilege like all the other people had had. So I was just fascinated. I just wanted to look at him. And then he said, he's heard a lot about me. Of course, he's spoken to Albertina Sisulu, and he's spoken to Bayes, and he had spoken to Murphy Morobi, who was then working almost as a PA for him and as an assistant, and to Vali Musa. And he said, look, everybody recommends you very highly. And then, would you like to work for me? I was gobsmacked. I thought, how this is my hero, it's a legend, asking me this question. And I said yes. I didn't even ask what the job was. I didn't even ask how much I was going to get. Nothing. None of those essential questions, will I get paid? What is the job? Nothing. I just said yes. And then he said, can you start tomorrow? I said, well, I am working with Umbe. He said, it's no problem. I've spoken to Umbe. Can you start tomorrow? And so literally from one movement, and I went back to Bay and I said, why didn't you tell me this? He says, I didn't want to say anything until you agreed. Umbe was very respectful. So that day I said goodbye to my colleagues at the Ecumenical Advice Bureau. And the next morning I pitched up here for duty, working with a wonderful person. First of all, patient. He was very clear he would teach me how he wanted things done. Two other people joined the office subsequently. It was Barbara Masekela and Frine Jinwala and Jenny Schreiner. And people often forget Jenny Schreiner, And he built us as a team. For him, this was his team. So we were the people who did his diary, made sure his briefing notes were intact, researched issues he wanted to research, looked after his personal affairs.
Do you think he was looking at all the race groups when he did that?
I thought of that sometimes, and I thought it's so strange that he was always so deliberate about race groups. It used to annoy me a little bit when he used to say to people, we've got Ronnie Casserols, Trevor Manuel, Cheryl Carolus, Mohamed Vali Musa, and then you'd pick people off and say, amongst others, in our NEC, and these are all people from different communities. And I used to think, why emphasize this? But he did that deliberately, I think. Because when we were together, he always took great pride in introducing the comrades from his office, and one by one, telling people about our histories and where we come from. And each one of us had quite a lot of experience politically. So I think he was very proud of the women that he worked with. Even though some of the men called us witches, he was proud, that he had women.
Were you witches?
Well, I think you become a witch when to others, when you realize that there's one human being, everybody wants access to him. Now you have to manage that in a way that you give access, but at the same time you give him space. because he loved reading and he needed morning time to read. So he always needed to read all the newspapers. Even though he got the packages from Jill Marcus and Joel and others on what was happening in the media, he preferred to finger the newspapers himself. And, you know, I thought about that. It's because they didn't get newspapers in prison. And so for him, you know, paging the taking notes as he's reading it, taking notes about what was being said in all these newspapers, and then and then he started meeting people, and he, you know, no more than 30 minutes at a time, quick meetings, always time for consultation with Uncle Walter Sisulu, with Mlangeni. Joe Slovo was on the floor, same floor as us, calling in Joe, calling in Chris Hani. Very often consulting. Now this is the time when the CODESA platform is being built. Also endlessly, we traveled endlessly to all the Bantustans then and met all the leaders of all the Bantustans to talk about them coming into the negotiation. Some were tough like Mangope, Gozo, Opa Gozo. Others were happy that Madiba had come to them to say it's time for us to unite the country, you know. And I remember Bantu Holomisa, I'll never forget that. I mean, he was young, a dictator in Transkei. I'll never forget the enthusiasm with which he came, you know. And I think about that often, and I think about him having left. And it was a fight he had with Madiba when he was a deputy minister, I think, at some point. But Madiba also met all the sectors. So we had to bring together all the priests of all different religious groups, the Muslim community, Christian priests and Hindu priests, and we wanted to meet them individually. Women's groups, business people, NAFCOC and NADEL and everybody. And at the time it was purely consultation about what this negotiation was going to be about, you know, and what the demands of the ANC would be. His advisors were Mac Maharaj, Thabo was a key advisor, and O.R. Tambo. He never moved an inch, Madiba, without consulting O.R. This I can tell you. I mean, it was very critical. They used to walk across from his room to wherever O.R. was, or see him at home, and they would chat about the next steps. Or Uncle Walter. And I think that many people did not understand the chemistry between these men. It was deep-rooted. And the sense of Madiba being an icon never entered into his frame. He thought of himself as part of a collective. And until the day O.R. passed away, he was part of that collective with O.R. And Uncle Walter passed away before he did. Uncle Walter was part of his collective, you know. And Kathy, Ahmed Katrada. So I think any notion that he was an ego-based individual is so completely unfounded. And I've seen that in some of the writings. I used to quibble with him and say, you actually don't know what you mean to this country. You know, you don't understand. He says, no, I like adoration, but I will not allow it to go to my head. And of course he was vain. He loved looking fantastic. I mean, everything he ever wore was impeccable. Loved the Madiba shirt. And that was a creation of Barbara Masekela's, by the way. And he told us he didn't want to dress like a European gentleman. So she found a designer that could make easy, comfortable clothes for him, and she bought fabric and took it to this man, and I mean, it was just wonderful to work in that environment. And of course, the Frini Jinwala, always correct. I used to call her the paragon of correctness. Everything must be correct. No arguments. Frini did all the right research. She did all the right things and got him to say. And of course, he would sometimes say, I'm not saying that, Frini. And Jenny Schreiner, I think, is one of the most brilliant creative minds I've come across. Working with her was an absolute pleasure. You know, she brought to the team a quietness, but with it such a solid political perspective. And also she was in the Communist Party. So not only were we Congress, but we were the movement working in one office, in a sense, you know, bringing different strengths. And I don't think that happens very often.
Can you tell us a little bit then about the person Mandela?
Well, I first met him actually in 1990 when he was coming to Durban. That's the first time I met him in my life. And it was the old Louis Botha airport in Durban. Came out of the place. I was with Linda Zama. Here comes this towering figure there, very slim. I was mesmerized. I really admired him. So we developed a very good father-son relationship with him. As a leader, he was very decisive. As a father, he will be able to caution you. For example, I had many engagements with him on my own personal life. He'll call me. One day I was with my wife in the US, so I used to know him now. If he calls and says, Tim Cole, so I know he's looking for a favor. If he says, Jeff, I know, trouble. Where are you? So there I'm in America. When are you coming back home? So I said, I tell him, the moment you land in Johannesburg, you must come straight to see me. Okay. So I tell my wife, I said, hey, but I want to tell her about other things. Says, hey, I think he wants to reshuffle the cabinet. I'm fired. So I land in Johannesburg, I call. Hey, take the first flight to Cape Town. So we had a pep talk of about an hour or so. So the point I'm making is that he'll confront you to say 1, 2, 3, and so on. But as a leader, uncompromising. When he wants a decision, Mandela, he'll make sure he'll be on your case. There's one time in 1994, he was really fascinated about this so-called Indian option, where the leadership of the Indian Congress comes from all regions in India. So he comes, we're having a conference in Durban, shortly before our Bloemfontein conference. Mangaung was still called Bloemfontein at that time. Then he says, Tim Cole, so I know he wants a favor. You know, we need to have this Indian option so that the members of the National Executive Committee must come from all the regions of South Africa. I've spoken with Tokyo. He has agreed on this proposal. So I'm talking to you because we're going to the conference now so that we can be able to present this. So before I could say yes or no, so we're to start the conference. So in his keynote address there, he says, I've spoken to your chairman here and he has agreed. So I called Tokyo, I called Ngwako, was still the chair there, I called Matthew, was still a chair of Eastern Transvaal. All of them, it was like, so we go to Bloemfontein, we decided that we have to defy him, we can't have this. So the point I'm making is that even though he was this towering figure, but when in certain instances he wants to push positions that we feel will not be good for the ANC, we express our views.
And he was open to that?
Was open, yeah.
And I think that that's really the making of a leader, isn't it? That
yeah.
he was able to listen to other
yeah.
people.
So the other attribute of Mandela, I think, is his tenacity, his enduring patience when he wants to achieve a thing. If you read his book, A Long Walk to Freedom, there are many people who have not understood
There's a chapter there when they talk about how he used to play chess. He was not a good chess player. So he used to play with this leader from SWAPO. I've forgotten the name. But the point is that he was not a good chess player, but he will tire the opponent. He will take maybe 2 hours, 3 hours to move his piece.
Just to put a timer there. Which is what I do now.
So the point I'm making, Mandela has always had a long-term view. In fact, Joe Matthews told me one day that in the mid-50s, Mandela once annoyed the leadership of the ANC. He was speaking in some function in Port Elizabeth, and he said he was going to be the first president of a new South Africa. So when you see how he dealt with the issue of negotiations, he was fixed that this is going to happen, and in my terms. The time of the armed struggle is over. Now we have to negotiate so that we become independent. So that statement which he made, his first visit to KwaZulu-Natal when he came out of jail, throw your weapons, your pangas, your knives into the sea. He meant it.
He talked about the armed struggle when he was underground for the first time. What had happened is that in 1961, there was a strike, which was broken up by the police. The strike was crushed. He was already underground. When he was underground, a British media person came into the country, and he put out feelers. He wanted to see Verwoerd, who was Prime Minister. I think Verwoerd refused to see him, some such thing. But then he put out feelers among people like Ruth Slovo and so forth, who were media persons, that can they not arrange for him to see Mandela? So he was, we had to identify a house that's never been used and will never be used for this purpose, because we don't know this chap well enough, this chap from England. I was shown that house, and I had to drive this chap to see Madiba. It was not the place he was staying, it was a house that was specially identified for him to meet this guy. And I had to drive him, and I got lost. And I went round and round and round until I found this place. I had been there the day before, but up till now, even now, my sense of direction is just not there. So I got lost. But when we eventually reached, he says, before we start, Mr. Mandela, I want to congratulate you on your security. He thought I was dodging the police. Anyway, that interview took place.
2 days before South Africa became a republic, a stay-away strike was organized throughout the country in protest. But most Africans went to work. 10,000 of them were arrested before the strike began. The army was fully mobilized, and an African knows he can be jailed for 3 years if he dares to strike. I went to see the man who organized this stay-away, a 42-year-old African lawyer, Nelson Mandela, the most dynamic leader in South Africa today. The police were hunting for him at the time, but African nationalists had arranged for me to meet him at his hideout. He is still underground. This is Mandela's first television interview.
The Africans want the franchise on the basis of one man, one vote. They want political independence.
The ANC leadership felt that it is time in South Africa to form a broad front for liberation. Because if you recall, at the time we had 4 pillars of the struggle. Firstly, it was the political mobilization of our people, which was very important. That's why this united front was needed. Underground political activities, the military activities by Umkhonto weSizwe, and the fourth one was the international mobilization to isolate the obnoxious system of apartheid that was declared by the UN as a crime against humanity and a threat to world peace.
Do you see Africans being able to develop in this country without the European being pushed out?
We have made it very clear in our policy that South Africa is a country of many races. There is room for all the various races in this country.
Many political organizations were invited to the Congress of the People in 1955. Of course, the Nationalist Party was also invited. Instead of attending, it sent a posse of police to go and arrest the participants at Cliptown. But anyway, the Freedom Charter was adopted, which says in its preamble, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And no government can justly claim authority unless it is based on the will of the people. That's the preamble of the Freedom Charter. And therefore, the idea of non-racialism was posited against the notion of white supremacy. The ruling bloc relied on this notion of white supremacy. And the Congress alliance opposed that by positing this idea of non-racialism, this idea that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And of course, no sooner had the Congress ended, by that very year, in December, 156 leaders of the Congress Alliance were arrested, rounded up and arrested and charged for high treason, because the apartheid government felt that this idea of non-racialism is high treason, is tantamount to high treason. So they charged them, 156 of them. The nationalist government promoted this notion of non-racialism because by taking 156 leaders, representative of the demographics of South Africa, and parading them, they kept them on trial, I mean, in batches, up to 1960, from 1956. So the people, ordinary people, could now rally and say, these are our leaders. And these leaders represented the entire broadest cross-section of South African population. And so the notion of non-racialism was given life by this treason trial of 1956.
Are there many educated Africans in South Africa?
Yes. We have a large number of Africans who are educated and who are taking part in the political struggles of the African people. The question of education has nothing to do with the question of the vote. On numerous occasions, it has been proved in history that people can enjoy the vote even if they have no education. Of course, we desire education, and we think it's a good thing. But you don't have to have education in order to know that you want certain fundamental rights, you have got aspirations, you have got claims. It has nothing to do with education whatsoever.
Are you planning any more campaigns of non-cooperation?
Yes. The Pietermaritzburg resolution makes provision for a campaign of non-cooperation with the government, and we are presently studying plans to implement this aspect of the resolution.
The defiance campaign and these resultant arrests enabled him and his generation to conquer the fear of being arrested. And so from that point onwards, they could challenge the system. But of course, the impact of the Defiance campaign was that not only Africans participated in this campaign. Whites who were progressive also participated. They defied by going into the townships without permits. And some of them were also arrested. And this is what made Professor Z.K. Matthews, in doing an appraisal of the impact of the Defiance campaign, to then pose the question, what precisely do we mean when we say we are fighting for freedom or liberation? What do we have in mind? Because for some people, freedom meant the removal of the notorious local police station head. That if this head of the police station here can be transferred, that is freedom. And so they had to define what they meant by freedom. And hence, the volunteers who participated in the Defiance campaign were now given another task, because now remember, they've learned out of this campaign the discipline of organizational work. And so they were tasked to go out into the villages, schools, universities, factories, mine compounds, everywhere, to put this question to ordinary people. What kind of South Africa would you like to live in? And literally hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper were collected as responses. And a team was put together to collate these responses and organize that information in a usable form. And therefore, the heads of the Freedom Charter were literally collated out of those responses. And the idea of a Congress of the People was born. At the end of the treason trial, as we know, the campaign against passes was organized. Pan-Africanist Congress organized that its supporters should present themselves at the nearest police station and leave their passes at home. The ANC resolved to embark on an anti-pass campaign on the 31st of March, and the PAC resolved that they will start that campaign on the 21st of March. And the PAC indeed organized and asked the African male folk to present themselves to police stations, the nearest police station, without their passes. So that the idea was to clock the system, that if all of them are arrested, the system would not be able to manage that challenge. However, in Sharpeville, the police officers there got very restive, reinforcements were summoned, and people were shot at. 69 people died, and many, many more were injured on that occasion. Following that tragedy, the leadership of the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela included, Walter Sisulu, Chief Albert Luthuli, decided that it's time for them to ban their passes. And so they banned their passes in public, literally made bonfire out of them. Earlier on, of course, the women had resisted, successfully resisted, the extension of the pass to African women. As way back as 1913, and again, the Great March of 1956 was, in fact, against the pass system. The pass defined the life of an African in that without it, you were almost knocking daily at the door of prison if you don't have a pass. With it, your entire movements were now restricted. And yet, it was important that you should have a pass in order for you to reside in a particular magisterial district and to find a job. Now, there was what they called the job seeker's permit. It was called a special. It was a special stamp. If you didn't have that stamp, even if you had the pass, you'd still be arrested. For loaferskap, loaferskap means you are a lumpen. You are a lumpen. You are someone who, you are not an unemployed, you are a lumpen. You refuse to work. Huh? And of course, that's how Afrikaner capital was accumulated, because they would use prison labor. These people who were arrested for this or that past offense, in the magistrate's court, you would appear being like 100 of you, all of you there. The magistrate just asks one question, guilty or not guilty, and anyone who says not guilty, they remand. So they send you back into jail. And of course, they could sell you for 50 cents to a farmer. That's why these farmers who were producing potatoes in Bethel, in those areas, relied on prison labor. And this is the whole effect of the pass system. And so it was important that there should be campaigns against the pass system. The state of emergency was declared. All these organizations were banned, became proscribed organizations. Now, that's when Nelson Mandela then says, in his own words, that there comes a time, there comes a time when, in the life of any nation, when the choice is either to submit or to resist. And he says, well, the Africans have taken a decision to resist. And so they would not accept that the ANC is banned. They will continue with their activities, and that meant they would go underground.
Now, if Dr. Verwoerd's government doesn't give you the kind of concessions that you want sometime soon, is there any likelihood of violence?
There are many people who feel that the reaction of the government to our stay at home, ordering a general mobilization, arming the white community, arresting 10,000s of Africans, the show of force throughout the country, notwithstanding our clear declaration that this campaign is being run on peaceful and non-violent lines, close the chapter as far as our methods of political struggle are concerned. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people. And I think the time has come for us to consider, in the light of our experiences in this stay at home, whether the methods which we have applied so far are adequate.
He's now saying a chapter has closed in our history. The strike was broken up by the army and the police. We should look for alternative, I'm not quoting him directly, alternative methods. Now, this is the first time that he indicates the need now to go on to an armed struggle.
Nelson Mandela, as the late Joe Matthews puts it, Nelson Mandela was always the volunteer-in-chief for the difficult tasks. He never sought to be elected as a leader, but whenever there was a difficult task, he would be the volunteer. And so at that time, there was need for someone to go underground, and lead the process of resistance. And Nelson Mandela volunteered to go underground, which meant parting with his family and getting into organizing underground, which meant that he could be arrested and or maimed and so on. It was during that period that he actually left the country, received training in Ethiopia and Algeria, and returned back into the country to organize. And during his stay at Lily's Leaf Farm, he read and made notes whilst he was at Lily's Leaf Farm. And when he was arrested in Howick and charged for having left the country without valid passport, and also organizing the Pietermaritzburg all-in conference, he was convicted and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. Part of and for a year he was on Robben Island. Now, he communicated with the lawyers that were in touch with him. People like, say, Bob Heppel, Bram Fischer, Joe Slovo, and said to them, please send someone to Lily's Leaf, because I left my notes there, handwritten notes. Get hold of them, destroy them. But of course, the lawyers were also political leaders. And so felt that, well, these notes are of historical value, so they shouldn't be destroyed. But they tasked Arthur Goldreich to find them. Now, Arthur Goldreich was at that time the main resident of Lily's Leaf Farm. And so he found them. He searched and found them and hid them. But he hid them in the coal bunker at Lily's Leaf Farm itself. And so later when the raid happened in 1963, and the police were turning the place upside down, they found those notes. Now, think of it. Nelson Mandela was already serving 5 years. He would have served his 5 years, completed it, and would have been released in 1967. And I don't know whether it's worth our while to speculate as to what would have happened, but maybe it didn't happen. So that way, so we shouldn't speculate. But he was actually not arrested at Lily's Leaf. He was already a prisoner serving 5 years. And when the raid happened and the rest of the Rivonia trialists were arrested there, and the police found these notes in his own handwriting, they linked him. And that's how he becomes accused number one at the Rivonia trial. And as we all know, they were sentenced to life imprisonment. The Rivonia trialists said to them as a legal team that, look, if we are sentenced to death, you must not appeal. Because if you appeal, that would paralyze our people. So we don't want to place our fate in the courts, apartheid courts. We place our fate in the hands of our people so that they should mobilize. And that's a sign of the courage of these Rivonia trialists. The type of courage that Chief Albert Luthuli referred to in his acceptance speech of the Nobel Peace Prize, when he said, what is required is courage which rises with danger.
In 1960-62, the main thrust or posture of the ANC was to make sure that we build an army to destroy the system of apartheid, because at that time the enemy had shown that for the past 50 years they were not willing to go to the negotiation table. As Chief Luthuli, the president of the ANC at the time, what has been the fruit of my 30 years of moderation? We want the courage that rises with danger. That is why we needed the Mandela of the time. President Zuma likes narrating the story that the first is Mandela who was motivating for the armed struggle. The first time into the NEC, they were defeated. So until Sisulu told him that no, must go to Kotane, so that you must explain this. So when it was properly presented, then the leadership accepted. So Patu Mandela was there because he has always understood that as a leader, he's like a shepherd, must always be behind the flock. But when there is danger, you must be in the front line.
For me as a filmmaker, what's interesting is how Madiba manages to win them over, and so the ANC becomes a very important struggle that the rest of the world, not only the African states, but the world begins to support. And it is, yes, Comrade Oar, who had to be the face all the time for us. And therefore people buy into it. But I'm also thinking about leaders like yourself, who are young people, who are militant, who believe that it's the armed struggle. And then almost, do you feel that it was aborted in some way?
No, I don't feel it was aborted. But maybe before that, I think I need to explain this difference between PAC and the ANC. My understanding is that why the policies of the ANC were durable, why eventually the majority of African states supported the ANC, is because they realized that we are not just fighting individuals to drive the white men into the sea, as it were. We're fighting the system of apartheid that caused the divisions amongst our people. So that's why Mandela, when he says, I fought against white domination, I fought against black domination, is very genuine. It was Mandela, because of his own history, who was breaking up meetings of the Communist Party in the early 50s, because he believed that there should only be one bull in the kraal, and that is the black bull. So these whites who are trying to influence the ANC must not be given a chance. But with counsel from Sisulu, but more particularly from one of the two greatest stalwarts of the struggle for freedom, J.B. Marx, who led the great miners' strike in Witwatersrand in 1946 and was the chairman of the Communist Party, Moses Kotane, who was the Treasurer General of the ANC and the General Secretary of the Communist Party from 1939 until his death in 1975. Those are the people who taught the young Mandela, the militant Mandela, the anti-communist Mandela, that the real struggle for freedom is a struggle to destroy the system of apartheid, so that never and never again, as he said, on the 10th of May shall it be that this beautiful land must return to oppression and become the skunk of the world. So he was genuine, because Mandela, through practical experience, he realized that the struggle for freedom would not just be solved by killing whites, but let's kill the real system that has given the strife amongst the South Africans. So our policies of the ANC are long-term, they are genuine, they are durable, they can build the kind of society that we want. That is why, contrary to the PAC, the whole world were behind the vision of the ANC, the vision of Tambo, the vision of Mandela.
Madiba at some point, because I think he shaped us, he shaped you. You worked so closely with him. There must be a lot of what he was rubbed off on you. What would you think are the most important gifts or wisdom that you got from him?
I think his compassion for the people of South Africa, his passion to persevere in spite of the hardships that he individually had to endure on Robben Island, Pollsmoor Prison, and later in Victor Verster. But his tenacity and his perseverance for not forgetting the long-term goal of freeing the people of South Africa. I think that compass was always with Mandela. So his decisiveness in all the historic moments, I think he had the knack to understand the periods in our country's history. We talked about the points, for an example, in 1952 when he became the volunteer-in-chief, because he understood that mass action must be the order of the day. We need to defy apartheid. But when he realized that these methods were not workable, the shift towards armed struggle, that's another critical historic moment. And also in the mid-80s, when he realized again the shifts in the global balance of forces, he realized that now was the time to move into another level of negotiations in order to resolve South Africa's problems. And when the moment came as well, in 1994, he realized that to build a strong, united South African nation, we must not forget the past, but we need to forgive in order to give our new democracy space to develop so that we can build a strong economy. So his immense contribution, Mandela, as I say, he was a colossus that strode the global stage, but his lasting contribution was that legacy of leading us into that vote, 27 April, and now creating conditions for reconciliation among South Africans to build one South African, regardless of color or creed.